During a naval ceremony honoring SEAL teams, Admiral Blackwood spots a quiet man in a worn jacket standing at the back of the hangar. With a smirk, he calls out to him in front of everyone. "What's your call sign, hero?" The crowd laughs as the Admiral continues his mockery. The veteran remains silent, eyes fixed on some distant point. When finally pressed too far, he raises his head and speaks just two words that instantly freeze every person in the room. Veterans straighten. The Admiral's face drains of color, and suddenly everyone understands exactly who they've been laughing at. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more untold tales of quiet heroes among us. The air in the boatyard hung thick with salt and diesel, broken only by the rhythmic sound of Thorn Merrick's work. His scarred hands moved with practiced precision across the weathered hull of an aging fishing boat. Each motion is economical and sure. Dawn had barely broken over West Haven Harbor, casting long shadows across the dock, where he'd spent nearly every morning for the past 7 years. Thorn paused, straightening his back and running a hand through his close-cropped hair, now more salt than pepper. At 43, his face carried the weathered lines of a man who had spent considerable time outdoors. But something about his eyes suggested those years hadn't all been spent on peaceful waters. They scanned his surroundings with a subtle vigilance that seemed unnecessary in the quiet marina. The sound of footsteps on the dock made him turn. Lana approached, carrying 2 travel mugs, her steps light despite the early hour. At 16, she had her mother's delicate features, but carried herself with a quiet confidence all her own. "You left without eating again," she said, offering him one of the mugs. Thorn accepted it with a nod. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd get an early start on the Callahan boat." Lana leaned against a piling, watching him work. She'd inherited his economy of words, their conversations often consisting more of comfortable silences than lengthy discussions. They communicated through small gestures. A coffee was brought to the dock, a favorite meal prepared without asking. A mechanical pencil was left on her music stand when she needed one. "I need this signed," she said finally, pulling a folded paper from her backpack. "Field trip to the naval base next week for music program fundraising." Thorn's hand hesitated almost imperceptibly over the permission slip. Something flickered behind his eyes before he carefully smoothed his expression. "What's it for?" he asked, voice casual. "Some ceremony for returning SEAL teams. Principal Finch thinks we might get donations for the arts program if we show up and play." Finally, he wiped his hands on a rag and took the paper, signing it with quick precision. "What time?" "Bus leaves at 8. Parents are welcome too. They need chaperones." Thorn handed the slip back without comment, turning to his work again. Lana recognized the subtle dismissal, but pressed on. "You could come. You never come to school things." "I've got boats to fix," he said, adjusting a clamp with more attention than it required. Lana watched him, head tilted slightly. "You avoid anything military. Every Veterans Day, every Memorial Day parade, you walk the other direction when you see Commander Adler in town." Thorn's shoulders tensed slightly. "I've got no quarrel with Commander Adler. Then why do you duck into stores when he comes down the street?" The question hung in the air between them. Lana waited, but Thorn remained focused on his work, his back to her. "Fine," she said finally, hefting her backpack. "I've got to go. Orchestra practice after school, so I'll be late." Thorn nodded without turning. "I'll leave dinner in the oven." After she left, he stopped working, his gaze drifting across the harbor to the naval vessels visible in the distance. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly before he returned to his task. His movements are now sharper, less fluid. West Haven was small enough that everyone claimed to know everyone else's business, yet large enough that secrets could still find shelter if kept carefully enough. Thorn had arrived 7 years ago with a 1-year-old daughter and a few possessions, renting the small boatyard that had been slowly falling into disrepair. He'd rebuilt it methodically, establishing a reputation for honest work and fair prices. He kept to himself, but was unfailingly polite, helping neighbors when storms threatened and joining community cleanups without being asked. Yet, he remained a mystery. Some said he'd been military. His bearing and efficiency suggested it, but he never confirmed nor denied it. He avoided questions about his past with such practiced casualness that most stopped asking. His only regular social contact outside of work was with Adresia Collins, the town librarian, who supplied Lana with books and occasionally shared a cup of coffee with Thorne when she dropped them off. That afternoon, the school gymnasium buzzed with concerned parents. Budget cuts had threatened programs across the district, but the arts had taken the heaviest hit. Thorne sat in the back row, arms crossed, as Principal Finch outlined the crisis. The music program needs $10,000 by the end of the semester. Or we lose the orchestra and band, Finch explained, his bow tie slightly askew as he gestured at projection slides. We've arranged a potential partnership with the naval base. They're holding a ceremony honoring SEAL teams next week. Our orchestra has been invited to perform. Parents murmured approval. West Haven's proximity to the base meant many families had military connections. Thorne remained silent, his face revealing nothing. Several high-ranking officers will attend, including Admiral Riker Blackwood. Finch continued. Potential donors as well. If we make a good impression, the program might secure funding beyond what we need. From her seat with the other orchestra students, Lana searched for her father's eyes, but he was watching Principal Finch with unusual intensity. As the meeting ended, parents clustered around Finch, offering help with transportation and refreshments. Thorne moved quietly toward the exit, avoiding the crowd. Mr. Merrick turned to find Adresia Collins, her arms full of sheet music. She'd volunteered as the orchestra's assistant director when budget cuts reduced the music teacher's hours. Ms. Collins, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Lana's solo is coming along beautifully, she said, falling into step beside him as he headed for the parking lot. Her mother taught her well. Thorne's face softened slightly. Sarah loved that cello. Started Lana on it when she was barely big enough to hold it. The naval base ceremony could be a good opportunity for Lana to be heard by people who might help her get scholarships later. She mentioned she wanted me to chaperone. He said, neutral voice. Adresia studied him. Will you? I'm not good with crowds. You're not good with military functions, she corrected gently. There's a difference. Thorne stopped walking, turning to face her fully. What makes you say that? Adresia met his gaze without flinching. I notice things like how you can identify every ship in the harbor by silhouette alone. How do you scan rooms before entering them? How do you position yourself with your back to the wall? Habits, he said dismissively. Trained habits, she countered. My brother served 3 tours before coming home. He has the same ones. Thorne resumed walking. His pace is slightly faster. I've got work waiting. She needs you there, Adresia called after him. Some ghosts follow us for a reason. Thorne didn't turn, but his stride faltered momentarily before he continued to his truck. That night, after Lana had gone to bed, Thorne stood in his bedroom, staring at the closet. After a long moment, he pulled a chair over and reached for the highest shelf, retrieving a metal box coated with dust. He placed it on the bed without opening it, staring at it as if it might contain something volatile. He hadn't touched it in years. A sound from down the hall made him quickly return the box to its place. He lay in bed afterward, staring at the ceiling, sleep elusive. When it finally came, it brought dreams that had become less frequent over the years, but never less vivid. Explosions, shouted orders in Arabic, the weight of a comrade over his shoulders, blood soaking through his uniform, a voice on the radio ordering them to abort. His own voice, calm despite everything, refusing the order. Then darkness, pain, and the faces of children huddled in a basement, looking up at him with terrified eyes. He woke before dawn, sweat-soaked and breathing hard. For several minutes he focused on slowing his heart rate, using techniques long ago ingrained. When he finally rose, decision made, the first hints of sunrise were just beginning to color the horizon. Lana found him in the kitchen making breakfast, an unusual occurrence that made her pause in the doorway. Everything okay? She asked cautiously. Fine, he said, sliding a plate of eggs and toast toward her. Eat. We'll be late. Late for what? School. I need to talk to Principal Finch about chaperoning that field trip. Lana's face brightened instantly. You're coming? Thorne nodded once, turning back to the stove. What changed your mind? He was quiet for a moment, then said simply, You did. The afternoon before the field trip, Thorne gathered the students in the orchestra room to review protocol for the naval base visit. His normally reserved demeanor had shifted to something more authoritative, and the teenagers responded to it instinctively. "You'll need ID at the checkpoint," he explained. "Follow directions immediately and without question from any unformed personnel. Stay with your assigned group. The base is a secure facility. Wandering off could get you detained." One boy raised his hand. "My dad says they have the new Virginia-class submarines there. Will we get to see those?" "No. The ceremony is in Hangar 4. You won't be anywhere near the submarines," Thorne answered with such specificity that several students exchanged glances. "How do you know which hangar?" another student asked. Thorne hesitated only briefly. It was in the information packet. The student frowned. "Mine just said Naval Base Ceremony." Mr. Merrick, one of the girls, interrupted. "Were you in the military?" The room grew quiet, all eyes on Thorne. He met their gaze calmly. "We're discussing tomorrow's field trip. Your bus leaves at 8 on. Don't be late." The deflection was so smooth that most students simply nodded and returned to packing their instruments. Only Lana noticed the slight tension in her father's shoulders as he turned away. As the students filed out, Adrija approached him. "That was quite the briefing, Sergeant." Thorne glanced at her sharply. "Excuse me?" "Just an observation," she said mildly. "You got the tone down perfectly. I've been on base before. Just want the kids prepared." Adrija nodded, accepting the explanation at face value. "You seem tense about tomorrow. I don't like crowds." "The ceremony honors SEAL Team 6 and related units," she said carefully, watching his reaction. "Admiral Blackwood will be presenting commendations for something called Operation Nightshade and recognizing the 10th anniversary of the Damascus extraction." If she expected a reaction, she was disappointed. Thorne's expression remained neutral as he gathered his keys. "Lana will do well," he said. "Her solo is prepared." "Thorne," Adrija said, her voice softening. "Whatever you're carrying, it doesn't have to be alone." He met her eyes briefly. "Some things are better carried alone. And some ghosts follow us for a reason," she repeated her earlier words. "Maybe it's time to find out why." That night, after checking that Lana was asleep, Thorne retrieved the metal box again. This time he opened it, revealing sparse contents. A worn photograph with faces purposely blurred, a folded American flag in a triangular display case, and a strange coin unlike any standard currency. He lifted the coin, running his thumb over its surface. Arabic inscriptions circled the edge, surrounding an image of an ancient building. He closed his hand around it tightly before replacing it in the box. As he dressed for the ceremony the next morning, Thorne caught his reflection in the mirror. He wore simple clothes, dark jeans, a blue button-down shirt, and a weathered leather jacket. Nothing that would stand out, nothing that would suggest any connection to the events being commemorated. He touched a faded scar at the base of his neck, partially visible above his collar. It was precisely the shape of the insignia that would be displayed prominently on Admiral Blackwood's uniform today. Staring at his reflection, he whispered, "One day. Just get through one day." The naval base checkpoint was efficient but thorough. The security guard examining IDs paused slightly longer over Thorne's, glancing up to compare his face to the photo before handing it back without comment. If he noticed anything unusual, his training prevented him from showing it. Inside the base, Thorne navigated the layout with surprising familiarity, guiding the students toward Hangar 4 without needing to check directions. Lana noticed but said nothing, accustomed to her father's unexplained knowledge about certain things. The hangar had been transformed for the ceremony with rows of chairs facing a stage draped in navy blue. Military personnel in formal dress uniforms mingled with civilians in suits and cocktail dresses. Along one wall, display boards showed sanitized images of recent operations and the faces of decorated team members. Thorne positioned himself behind Lana at the back of the hangar near an exit. His eyes methodically scanned the room in a pattern that seemed instinctive rather than conscious. Occasionally, active duty SEALs in attendance would glance in his direction, their expressions curious before they turned away. Admiral Riker Blackwood cut an impressive figure as he took the stage. Tall and broad-shouldered despite being in his mid-50s, his chest adorned with rows of colorful service ribbons, He carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. His voice filled the hangar without needing amplification. Distinguished guests, honored veterans, ladies and gentlemen, today we recognize the extraordinary courage and sacrifice of our naval special warfare operators. The crowd applauded politely. Thorn remained still, his expression unreadable. Over the past decade, these elite warriors have conducted operations that have shaped global security in ways most Americans will never know. Blackwood continued, his practiced cadence suggesting he'd given similar speeches many times. I've had the privilege of commanding some of the most classified missions in recent military history. As Blackwood began detailing recent SEAL operations with carefully sanitized specifics, Thorn's expression shifted subtly. To most observers, he appeared to be listening attentively. But Lana noticed a change in his breathing pattern and the slight narrowing of his eyes. Operation Kingfisher resulted in the elimination of 3 high-value targets in a single night, Blackwood announced with evident pride. The team infiltrated by sea, covered 11 kilometers on foot, and completed the objective with 0 civilian casualties. Thorn's lips pressed together momentarily. His hand opened and closed at his side in a barely perceptible rhythm. Operation Black Anvil recovered critical intelligence that prevented an attack on Allied forces. The team performed a halo insertion at 30,000 FT in weather conditions that would ground most aircraft. Thorn's jaw tightened slightly, a muscle working just below his ear. In the second row, Commander Sable, a lean, observant officer in his 40s, noticed Thorn's micro-reactions. His attention shifted between Blackwood's speech and the quiet man at the back of the hangar. Perhaps most significantly, Blackwood continued, his voice taking on a more solemn tone. We commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Damascus operation. Many details remain classified, but I can tell you that difficult decisions were made under my command. We saved American lives while upholding the highest traditions of naval service. At this, Thorn's hand trembled slightly. He steadied it against his leg, his face a careful mask. Commander Sable leaned toward another officer, whispering something while nodding discreetly toward Thorn. The officer studied Thorn briefly before typing something into his phone. As the ceremony transitioned to a reception with refreshments, the orchestra students prepared for their performance. Lana unpacked her cello, tuning it carefully while Thorn stood nearby. His attention split between her and the room's occupants. Your solo is third, Adresia reminded Lana. Remember to breathe through the difficult passage in the middle. Lana nodded, her focus absolute as she reviewed the music. Her fingers moved silently over the strings, practicing the most challenging sections without sound. When the orchestra began playing, conversations quieted, and the students performed admirably, their music filling the hangar with unexpected beauty. When Lana's solo began, a haunting adaptation of Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings, many in the audience seemed genuinely moved. Admiral Blackwood, mingling near the refreshment table, paused to listen. After the performance concluded to enthusiastic applause, he made his way toward the orchestra members who were now enjoying refreshments. Impressive playing, he said, addressing Lana directly. The cello solo was particularly moving. Thank you, sir, she replied, the formality coming naturally in the setting. You have a gift, Blackwood continued. Your school should be proud to have such talented students. Our music program is being cut unless we raise funds, Lana explained. That's why we're here today. A shame, Blackwood said. The arts are too often sacrificed. His attention shifted to Thorn, who had approached quietly. Are you the music director? Her father, Thorn, answered simply. Blackwood assessed him with the practiced eye of a commander. You carry yourself like military. You served a lifetime ago, Thorn said, his tone neutral. Something in Blackwood's demeanor shifted subtly, his polite interest hardening into something more evaluative. Yet you wear no identifiers of service, no pins, no unit associations. Don't need them, Thorn replied. A small crowd had begun to form around them, sensing the undercurrent of tension. Blackwood's voice carried easily to nearby guests. Most men are proud to display their service, especially at a military function. Pride takes different forms, Thorn said. Blackwood's smile remained, but his eyes cooled. What unit, if I may ask? Does it matter? Simply professional curiosity, Blackwood replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. I've commanded many over the years. Thorn remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the implied question about whether he might have served under Blackwood. Lana glanced between them, confused by the growing hostility. Commander Sable had approached quietly, positioning himself just within earshot. His attention focused on Thorn with increasing interest. Deployments? Blackwood pressed, maintaining his smile for the benefit of onlookers. A few, Thorn answered vaguely. Strange, Blackwood said, his voice slightly louder now, drawing more attention. Most veterans I know are quite willing to discuss their service, particularly at an event honoring the sacrifices of our special operators. The subtle emphasis on special operators hung in the air between them. An older veteran standing nearby whispered to his neighbor, "Something's not right about this." Blackwood, clearly playing to the gathering crowd, spread his hands in a gesture of exaggerated curiosity. "We've got ourselves a mystery man. Perhaps he can share his expertise on special operations." A ripple of laughter moved through the onlookers. Lana's face flushed with embarrassment as she realized her father was being mocked. "I'm guessing motor pool," Blackwood suggested, his voice dripping with false congeniality. "Perhaps kitchen duty." More laughter followed. Thorn remained motionless, his expression controlled, but tension visible in the set of his jaw. Commander Sable took a step forward as if to intervene, but stopped when Blackwood continued his performance. "What's your call sign, hero?" he asked, smiling broadly at the crowd's reaction. "Or didn't they issue you one?" The hangar seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for Thorn's response. Lana looked mortified, her hand finding her father's arm as if to pull him away. Thorn stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on a distant point over Blackwood's shoulder. For several long seconds, it seemed he might not respond at all. Then his gaze shifted, meeting Blackwood's directly. "You know, Admiral," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence, "Damascus wasn't quite as you described it." The crowd's murmurs ceased immediately. Blackwood's expression froze, the smile still in place, but something calculating entered his eyes. "And what would you know about classified operations?" he asked, defensive edge replacing the mockery in his tone. Thorn's response came slowly, each word measured. "I know the exact sound a Russian RPG makes when it hits 3 clicks away. I know the taste of blood and sand mixed with fear. I know what it means to carry a brother's body through 20 men-hours of hostile territory." A heavy stillness fell over the gathering. Commander Sable's attention was now fully fixed on Thorn, his expression shifting from curiosity to something more complex. Blackwood's face had hardened, all pretense of joviality gone. "Who exactly do you think you are?" When Thorn didn't immediately answer, Blackwood pressed again, his voice sharper, more demanding. "I asked you a simple question, soldier. What was your call sign?" Thorn looked at Lana first, an unspoken apology in his eyes. Then he turned back to Blackwood and said with quiet precision, 2 words that seemed to freeze the air in the entire hangar: "Iron Ghost." In the profound silence that followed, an older SEAL standing nearby whispered audibly, "Holy, he's real." Complete stillness overtook the hangar. Thorn's words seemed to hang in the air, altering the atmosphere with their gravity. Blackwood's face drained of color so rapidly that it appeared he might be ill. He took an involuntary step backward, his composure shattered by those 2 simple words. Veterans throughout the room straightened instinctively, as if suddenly finding themselves in the presence of unexpected authority. Civilians looked confused but sensed the seismic shift that had just occurred, their expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. The whispers started at the edges of the crowd and rippled inward like a wave. Iron Ghost, Damascus, the operative who vanished. Lana stared at her father, seeing him with new eyes, a stranger suddenly inhabiting the familiar form. The quiet boatyard owner of West Haven stood differently now, his careful camouflage of ordinariness falling away to reveal something harder, more defined. Commander Sable approached slowly, his movements deliberate, as if concerned any sudden motion might trigger something dangerous. His eyes never left Thorn's face, studying it with recognition gradually dawning. "That's impossible," Blackwood finally managed. His voice had lost all its earlier confidence and mockery. "Iron Ghost is a ghost," Thorn finished, his tone matter of fact. That was the agreement. A senior intelligence officer standing nearby dropped his drink, the glass shattering on the hangar floor. No one moved to clean it up. All eyes remained fixed on the confrontation unfolding before them. Lana watched in confusion as the room's power dynamic inverted completely. The Admiral, who had commanded attention minutes before, now seemed diminished, while her father, always deliberately unremarkable, suddenly occupied the center of a storm of attention without moving an inch. "Damascus," Commander Sable said quietly, the word carrying clearly in the silence. The hostage extraction went wrong. Thorne's silence was confirmation enough. He neither confirmed nor denied. Yet somehow his stillness spoke volumes to those who understood what was happening. "Dad?" Lana's voice was small, uncertain. "What's going on?" Thorne looked at her, and for a brief moment, pain flashed across his features before he regained control. Before he could answer, Blackwood recovered enough of his composure to attempt to reassert authority over the situation. "If you are who you claim," he began, his tone defensive. "October 17th, Thorne interrupted, eyes returning to Blackwood. "The safe house was compromised. You ordered the team to abort from your command post in Qatar." The precision of the date and details landed like physical blows. Several officers in attendance exchanged glances. Their expressions indicated the information was not common knowledge. Sable took another step forward. "But you didn't abort." "4 hostages," Thorne replied simply. "3 children. We stayed." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Blackwood's face flushed with anger, replacing his earlier shock. "Those were not your orders," he snapped, forgetting the audience around them. "No," Thorne agreed calmly. "They weren't." The admission should have vindicated Blackwood, but something in Thorne's steady gaze made it sound like an indictment instead. Adresia had made her way through the crowd to stand beside Lana and placed a supportive hand on the girl's shoulder. Her eyes remained on Thorne, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face: concern, sadness, and something that might have been vindication. 3 teammates died that night, Thorne continued, his voice controlled, but intense. Each word seemed precisely chosen. "The official record says they died because I disobeyed orders." Sable's expression darkened. "But that's not what happened. It wasn't a question." The way he said it made it clear he'd harbored doubts about the official version of events for some time. The intelligence was wrong. Thorne said the extraction point was an ambush. Someone leaked our position. All eyes in the room shifted to Blackwood, whose career had advanced rapidly after Damascus. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. "The choice was simple," Thorne continued. "Follow orders and abandon the hostages to certain death or attempt the impossible." Blackwood's face had gone from pale to flushed to molded with rage and fear. "You have no proof of any of this," he said, attempting to sound authoritative but achieving only desperation. Thorne reached slowly into his pocket, the movement causing several nearby security personnel to tense. What he withdrew, however, was not a weapon but the strange coin seen earlier in his metal box. He held it up, the metal catching the light. "Damascus mint," he explained, "given to me by the father of those children after we got them out." He flipped the coin to Sable, who caught it reflexively and examined it closely. "This matches the description in the classified debrief," Sable confirmed, looking up with new respect in his eyes. Lana stared at the coin, then at her father, struggling to reconcile the quiet boatyard owner with the man standing before her now. A man whose mere presence had transformed a room full of high-ranking military officers. "After the extraction," Thorne said, his eyes finding Lana, "I was offered a choice. Disappear with an honorable discharge, buried so deep no one could find it, or face court-martial for insubordination." He held his daughter's gaze steadily. "I had a 1-year-old daughter who just lost her mother. I chose to disappear." Understanding bloomed across Lana's face, quickly followed by confusion and hurt. All these years her father had been someone else entirely, someone with a past so significant it caused admirals to pale and commanders to stare in recognition. Yet he had shared none of it with her. "These accusations are outrageous and unfounded," Blackwood sputtered, attempting to regain control of the situation. His eyes darted around the room, searching for allies, but found mostly wary observation. "Are they?" An older admiral stepped forward from the crowd, his weathered face grave. They seemed consistent with concerns that have been raised about the Damascus operation for years. Sable nodded in agreement. "Sir, I served with men who were there. Their accounts never match the official record." Blackwood's expression shifted rapidly between anger, fear, and calculation. "This is neither the time nor the place for such discussions. We're here to honor current operations, not rehash ancient history." "I didn't come here for this," Thorne said, his voice steady. "I came for my daughter." He glanced at Lana, then back to Blackwood. "But I won't stand here and listen to you take credit for the sacrifice of better men." The hangar had grown unnaturally quiet. Even the ambient sounds of the base outside seemed muted, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Blackwood attempted to reassert his authority, drawing himself up and fixing Thorne with what was clearly meant to be an intimidating stare. "You disappeared for a reason, Merrick. Perhaps you should have stayed gone." The threat hung in the air, but before Thorne could respond, Sable raised his hand in a formal military salute directed at Thorne. The gesture was deliberate, public, and unmistakable in its meaning. One by one, other service members present followed suit. Veterans, active duty personnel, and even some civilians with military backgrounds. Silently, they acknowledged what Blackwood had tried to mock. Blackwood found himself surrounded by men and women saluting the quiet man in the weathered jacket. Trapped by protocol and the weight of collective recognition, he reluctantly raised his hand in the salute he never thought he'd give. Thorne returned the salute with perfect precision, the muscle memory of years of service evident in every line of his body. Then he lowered his hand and turned to Lana, whose expression remained a complex mixture of confusion, awe, and hurt. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," he said quietly. Before she could respond, Sable approached, still holding the Damascus coin. He offered it back to Thorne with evident respect. "Your team saved those children," he said. "History should know that." Thorne accepted the coin, tucking it away carefully. "History isn't my concern," he replied, nodding toward Lana. "She is." Lana studied her father's face, seeing it as if for the first time. "All this time," she said softly, "you never said anything." "Some burdens aren't meant to be shared," Thorne answered. The crowd began to disperse, breaking into small groups, whispering urgently about what they had witnessed. Several senior officers had gathered around Blackwood, their expressions grave as they escorted him toward a private room off the main hangar floor. As Thorne and Lana prepared to leave, personnel stood aside respectfully, creating a path through the crowd. Several veterans approached briefly, offering quiet words of thanks or simple nods of acknowledgement. Thorne accepted them with the same reserve he'd always shown, though something in his bearing had subtly changed. Commander Sable caught up to them near the exit. "The record can be corrected now," he said. "Your team deserves recognition." "My team deserves peace," Thorne replied. "Most of them found it the hard way." Sable's expression softened. "What about you?" Thorne looked at Lana, who was gathering her cello case, still visibly processing everything she'd learned. "I'm working on it," he said simply. The drive back to West Haven passed in heavy silence. Lana stared out the window, occasionally glancing at her father as if seeing a stranger behind the wheel. Thorne kept his eyes on the road, giving her space to process. Finally, as they approached the town limits, she spoke. "Were you ever going to tell me?" Thorne considered the question carefully. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "I wanted to protect you from that part of my life." "From knowing who you really are? From the complications that come with it?" He corrected gently. "Those people today," Lana said, "they looked at you like you were some kind of legend." "People build legends to make sense of things they don't understand," Thorne replied. "I'm just a man who made choices, some good, some not so good." "Iron Ghost," she said, testing the name. "That was really you?" Thorne nodded once, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. "A lifetime ago." "And Mom? Did she know?" His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "She knew everything," he said quietly. "She was the strongest person I've ever known." They pulled into the driveway of their modest house to find Adresia waiting on the porch steps. She stood as they approached, her expression somber but unsurprised. "I thought you might need a friendly face," she said as they got out of the truck. Thorne studied her. "You always knew," he said. "It wasn't a question." I suspected, Adricia admitted. My brother served. He told me once about a ghost who carried him through the desert with 2 broken legs. Said it was like being rescued by a legend. Lana's eyes widened. Your brother was there in Damascus. Adricia nodded. He never knew the man's real name. Just said he moved like a shadow and refused to leave anyone behind, even when the command ordered it. Called him the ghost because he seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. Why didn't you say anything? Thorne asked. For the same reason you didn't, she replied simply. Some stories belong to the teller. I figured you'd share yours when you were ready. Or not. Lana looked between them, a new understanding dawning. That's why you two are friends. You knew his secret. I knew he was a good man who valued his privacy. Adricia corrected. The details didn't matter. Inside, Thorne made coffee while Lana sat with Adricia at the kitchen table. The normal routine felt strange now. Domestic actions performed by hands that had apparently done far more consequential things. What happens now? Lana asked, watching her father move around the kitchen. We go on, he said, setting mugs on the table. Nothing's really changed. Everything's changed, she countered. Admiral Blackwood looked like he wanted to disappear when you said your name. Those people saluted you. Commander Sable talked about correcting records. Thorne sat heavily. Blackwood built his career on missions like Damascus, taking credit for successes, burying failures. Men like him don't fall easily. But if what you said is true, it's true. Adricia interrupted quietly. My brother was there. What he described matches your father's account exactly. Then he should be held accountable. Lana insisted. Thorne shook his head. It's not that simple. The official narrative has been in place for a decade. Changing it now would raise questions about other operations, other commanders. So he just gets away with it. Lana's voice rose slightly, indignant on her father's behalf. I made my peace with it long ago, Thorne said. Coming forward wouldn't bring back the men we lost. It wouldn't change what happened, but it would clear your name, Lana persisted. You're living in hiding because of him. Thorne's expression softened. I'm living the life I chose with you. That's all that matters to me. The conversation was interrupted by Thorne's phone ringing, an unusual occurrence that made them all turn toward the sound. He checked the screen, frowning at the unfamiliar number before answering. Merrick, he said simply. His expression remained neutral as he listened, but Lana noticed his posture straightening slightly, his military bearing reasserting itself unconsciously. I understand, he said finally. No, that won't be necessary. I appreciate the courtesy call. He ended the call and set the phone down carefully. What is it? Adricia asked. Commander Sable, Thorne answered. Blackwood is claiming I made threats against him. They're considering reopening the Damascus file for review. Is that good or bad? Lana asked. Depends on who's doing the reviewing, Thorne replied. Sable says he's going to push for an independent investigation, but Blackwood has powerful friends. The three sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the implications. Finally, Adricia stood, gathering her things. You two have a lot to talk about, she said. Call if you need anything. After she left, Thorne and Lana remained at the table, the weight of unspoken questions filling the space between them. I have so many things I want to ask, Lana finally said. I don't even know where to start. Thorne nodded. Ask what you need to. I won't hide things from you anymore. The scar on your neck, she began. It's the same shape as the insignia on Admiral Blackwood's uniform. Unit identification, he confirmed. Most of us had it tattooed. Mine was removed when I disappeared. The scar is what's left. And our last name. Is Merrick even real? Thorne hesitated. It was your mother's maiden name. My birth name was classified when I vanished. Taking her name made the transition easier. Lana absorbed this, her fingers tracing patterns on the tabletop. The men who died in Damascus, were they your friends? A shadow passed over Thorne's face. Brothers, he corrected quietly. Closer than blood. Do you miss it? She asked. Being whoever you were before. Thorne considered the question carefully. I miss the clarity sometimes, he admitted. Knowing exactly what needed to be done and having the skills to do it. But I don't miss the cost. What was she like? Lana asked suddenly. Mom, when you were both part of that life. Thorne's expression softened. Brilliant, fearless. She was an intelligence analyst, the best I ever worked with. She could see patterns no one else could. That's how you met. He nodded. She flagged inconsistencies in border-crossing data that everyone else missed, led us straight to a cell-planning attacks on 3 embassies, saved hundreds of lives before they even knew they were in danger. Lana smiled slightly. That sounds like the mom I remember, always noticing things. You're like her that way. Thorne said. You see what others miss. They talked long into the night. Thorne answered questions as honestly as he could while still protecting Lana from the worst of his experiences. He told her about his training, about the brotherhood of his team, about missions and countries she'd barely heard of. He spoke of her mother's brilliance and courage, filling in gaps in Lana's memories with stories of the woman who had helped shape both their lives. What he didn't tell her were the details that still woke him in the night. The weight of bodies carried through hostile territory, the sound a man makes when he knows he's dying far from home, the moment when you realize the intelligence was wrong and you've led good men into a trap. Some burdens weren't meant to be shared. The following Monday, Thorne returned to his boatyard, determined to maintain as much normality as possible despite the events at the base. He worked methodically on the Callahan boat, focusing on the familiar rhythm of repairs as a way to center himself. Mid-morning, the sound of approaching vehicles made him look up. 3 black SUVs with government plates pulled into the gravel lot. Commander Sable emerged from the first one, accompanied by 2 men in suits. Thorne set down his tools and wiped his hands, watching their approach with a wary expression. Mr. Merrick, Sable greeted him formally. I apologize for the intrusion. This is Agent Kavanaugh from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service and Special Investigator Durand from the Inspector General's office. The men nodded in acknowledgement but remained professionally detached. What can I do for you, gentlemen? Thorne asked, his tone neutral. We're conducting a preliminary inquiry into the events surrounding Operation Damascus, Kavanaugh explained. Your statements at the ceremony have raised questions that require investigation. I didn't make any formal statements, Thorne pointed out. I was responding to direct provocation. Nevertheless, Durand interjected. The information you revealed conflicts with the official record. Admiral Blackwood has submitted a complaint alleging you made false accusations in a public forum. Thorne's expression remained impassive. I stated facts as I experienced them. That's why we're here, Sable said, to establish what actually happened. The Damascus operation has been surrounded by inconsistencies for years. Your appearance provides an opportunity to address them. Thorne studied the men carefully, assessing their intentions. What exactly are you looking for from me? We'd like your formal deposition regarding the events in Damascus, Kavanaugh said. Specifically, the intelligence provided before the operation, the chain of command during execution, and the circumstances surrounding the casualties. Those records were sealed a decade ago, Thorne said, by mutual agreement. Agreements can be revisited when new evidence emerges, Durand replied. Thorne gestured toward the boatyard office. Let's continue this conversation inside. As they walked toward the small building, Sable fell into step beside Thorne. Blackwood is being called to Washington, he said quietly. This goes beyond just Damascus now. There are questions about other operations, other reports. Thorne glanced at him sharply. I'm not interested in bringing down the system. I just want to be left alone. It may be too late for that, Sable replied. You became visible the moment you said those 2 words in the hangar. Inside the office, Thorne offered the men coffee, which they declined. They settled around the small conference table normally used for discussing boat repairs with clients. Before we begin, Thorne said, I need to know what happens to my daughter if I cooperate. The investigators exchanged glances. Nothing changes for her, Kavanaugh assured him. This investigation concerns historical events, not your current civilian status. And my identity remains as it is, Durand said. We have no interest in disrupting your life here. This is about accountability for what happened in Damascus, not exposing you. Thorne considered this, then nodded once. What do you want to know? For the next 2 hours, he answered their questions with clinical precision, recounting the Damascus operation in detail. He described the initial intelligence briefing, the insertion into hostile territory, and the moment they realized the safe house had been compromised. He explained the decision to continue despite orders to abort, the firefight that ensued, and the desperate extraction with wounded teammates and terrified hostages. Throughout his account, Kavanaugh took notes while Duran recorded the conversation. Sable listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions about tactical decisions or command communications. The official report states that you disobeyed a direct order, resulting in the deaths of 3 team members, Duran said. Finally, your account suggests the casualties occurred because the extraction point was compromised, not because of your decision to proceed. Correct, Thorne confirmed. We were ambushed at the designated extraction point. Someone knew exactly where we would be. And you believe that information was leaked, Kavanaugh stated. I know it was, Thorne said firmly. The only people with knowledge of that location were the team on the ground and the command post in Qatar. We maintained communication discipline throughout. The leak came from somewhere else. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Do you have any evidence to support that conclusion? Duran asked. The bodies of my teammates, Thorne replied coldly, and the pattern of enemy movement that night. They weren't searching, they were waiting. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lana stood in the doorway, school backpack over her shoulder, surprise evident on her face at finding her father with visitors. Sorry, she said. I didn't know you had a meeting. Thorne beckoned her in. It's fine. We're almost finished. The investigators watched her enter, their expressions professionally neutral, but curiosity evident in their eyes. Here was the reason Iron Ghost had disappeared, walking into the room with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet composure. Lana, this is Commander Sable and investigators Kavanaugh and Durand. They're asking about some of my previous work. She nodded politely, but her eyes were sharp, evaluating the Damascus operation. The men looked surprised at her knowledge. Yes, Thorne confirmed. They're reviewing the record. Lana set down her backpack. Will you be much longer? Principal Finch wants to talk to you. The naval base called about special funding for the music program. Thorne glanced at the investigators. We're done for today, I think. Durand nodded, gathering his materials. We'll be in touch regarding next steps. There will likely be additional questions as we proceed. As the men prepared to leave, Sable handed Thorne a business card. Call if you think of anything else or if you have concerns. After they departed, Lana watched their vehicles leave from the office window. Are you in trouble? Thorne shook his head. No, they're investigating what happened in Damascus, trying to correct the record, because of what you said at the ceremony. Partly, he acknowledged. But Commander Sable indicated there have been questions about that operation for years. I just brought them to the surface. Lana studied her father. Is it worth it after all this time? Thorne considered the question carefully. 3 good men died that night. Their families were told they died because I disobeyed orders. If the truth can give them peace, then yes, it's worth it. Even if it means people know who you really are now. That's already happening, Thorne said, gesturing toward the departing vehicles. The best I can do is try to control the fallout. Later that evening, as Thorne prepared dinner, his phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed Dresdia's name. You need to see this, she said without preamble. Turn on any news channel. Thorne found the remote for the small television they rarely used. The screen flickered to life, showing a news anchor with a serious expression. Breaking news from Washington. The anchor announced that Admiral Riker Blackwood, commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 1, has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into allegations of misconduct related to classified operations. Sources close to the Pentagon indicate the inquiry centers on potentially falsified after-action reports from several high-profile missions over the past decade. The screen showed Blackwood leaving a building surrounded by reporters shouting questions. His face was set in a mask of controlled anger. While details remain classified, the anchor continued. Our sources indicate the investigation was triggered by revelations from a former special operator believed to have been involved in a controversial hostage rescue in Damascus 10 years ago. The Pentagon has declined to comment on specific allegations, but confirmed that several operations under Blackwood's command are now under review. Lana had joined Thorne in the living room, watching the broadcast with wide eyes. "That's because of you," she said softly. "Not just me," Thorne replied. "Sable said there have been questions for years. I was just the catalyst." The broadcast continued, speculating about the implications of the investigation and Blackwood's future. Thorne watched silently, his expression unreadable. The doorbell rang, startling them both. Thorne moved to the window and peered out cautiously. Decades of training are still ingrained. What he saw made him freeze. Standing on his porch were three men. Their bearing was unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. The distinctive posture of special operators. One walked with a prosthetic leg partially visible beneath his jeans. Another held a folded flag identical to the one in Thorne's metal box. "Dad?" Lana asked, concerned by his sudden stillness. "Who is it?" Thorne turned to her, his face showing an emotion she had rarely seen there. "Ghosts," he said quietly. "From Damascus." Thorne stood motionless at the window, staring at the men on his porch as if seeing apparitions. In many ways, they were exactly that. Figures from a past he had buried suddenly materialized in the present. "Dad?" Lana's voice broke through his shock. "Who are they?" Thorne turned to her, his expression a complex mixture of disbelief, recognition, and something deeper. Perhaps fear, hope. "Men I served with," he said quietly. "Men I thought were gone." Before he could explain further, a knock sounded at the door, confident but not demanding. Thorne approached it slowly, decades of ingrained caution making him scan the yard beyond the visitors before reaching for the handle. When he opened the door, time seemed to compress. The men on his porch stood with the distinctive bearing of special operators, a posture and presence impossible to counterfeit. One leaned slightly on a carbon fiber prosthetic leg visible beneath his jeans. Another held a folded flag triangle identical to the one in Thorne's metal box. The third, standing slightly in front, was Commander Sable. "Merrick," Sable greeted him formally. "Commander," Thorne responded, his voice carefully neutral. "May we come in?" Sable asked. "There are matters we need to discuss." Thorne hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. The three men entered, their movements economical and precise. Their eyes scanned the interior automatically, assessing exits, cover, and potential threats before settling into a more relaxed stance. The man with the prosthetic leg stepped forward first. "Been a long time, Ghost." Thorne stared at him, recognition dawning. "Weston, they told me you didn't make it." "Nearly didn't," Weston acknowledged, gesturing to his leg. "Spent 8 months in Walter Reed. By the time I got out, you were gone, off the grid completely." The third man, still holding the folded flag, nodded in greeting. Archer introduced himself. "I was Seth Riley's replacement on the team." After Thorne's expression tightened at the name. Seth Riley, one of the men lost in Damascus. The flag Archer held suddenly made sense. It was a connection to those who hadn't returned. Lana stood in the doorway to the living room, watching the reunion with wide eyes. Thorne beckoned her forward. "This is my daughter, Lana," he said. "Lena, this is Commander Sable, whom you've met, and these are Travis Weston and Marcus Archer," the man supplied. "Your father saved a lot of lives, including Weston's here. Carried him 11 clicks through hostile territory with that leg barely attached." Lana looked at her father with new eyes. The quiet man who repaired boats and avoided attention was transformed in the presence of these men who knew him from before. "Please sit," Thorne offered, gesturing to the living room. The formality felt strange in his own home, but nothing about this situation was normal. Once seated, an awkward silence fell. Years of separation, classified operations, and buried truths created a conversational minefield. Finally, Sable broke the tension. "The investigation into Damascus has been expedited," he said. "Your statement this morning corroborated what we've suspected for years. Blackwood is finished. That's not why you're here," Thorne said, studying their faces. "Not all of you, anyway." Weston nodded. "We've been looking for you, Ghost, ever since Damascus. When you disappeared, we thought you might be dead." Then rumors started. Whispers about arrangements made, records erased. "Witness protection?" Lana asked. Something like that. Thorne confirmed. Less official, more permanent. We understood why you left, Archer said, but the story was wrong. The men we lost, Riley, Donovan, Kramer, they deserve better than to be remembered as casualties of insubordination. Thorne's expression darkened. I made my peace with that a long time ago. Maybe you did, Weston countered, but their families never could. That's why I kept looking. The investigation will set the record straight, Sable assured them. But there's more to discuss. The Pentagon is reviewing all of Blackwood's operations. Multiple discrepancies have emerged. Not my concern anymore, Thorne said firmly. It should be, Archer replied, placing the folded flag on the coffee table between them. This belongs to you. Riley's family wanted you to have it when we found you. Thorne stared at the flag, making no move to touch it. Why now? Why after all this time? Because the truth matters, Weston said simply. To the families. To those of us who survived. And I think somewhere deep down, it still matters to you. Lana watched her father's face, seeing conflict there that he rarely allowed to surface. For years he had lived as Thorne Merrick, boatyard owner, single father. Now, Iron Ghost was reclaiming space within him, demanding acknowledgement. There's going to be a ceremony, Sable explained. Private, classified, but the Secretary of the Navy will be there. The records will be corrected officially. The men lost in Damascus will receive proper recognition, as will the survivors, including you, Weston added. Especially you. Thorne shook his head. I don't need recognition. This isn't about what you need, Archer said firmly. It's about what's right. Those men died because the extraction point was compromised, not because you disobeyed orders. Their families deserve to know that. The investigation has already uncovered evidence that Blackwood received intelligence about the compromised extraction point before you reached it. Sable revealed. He knew it was an ambush, Ghost. He knew, and he still ordered you in. The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. Thorne's expression hardened, muscles tensing visibly. Why? He asked finally, voice dangerously quiet. Sable and Weston exchanged glances. We're still determining the full picture, Sable admitted. But preliminary findings suggest Blackwood was building a case for expanded operations in the region. A successful extraction would have helped his cause. A catastrophic failure would have proven the need for greater resources. He gambled with our lives, Weston said, anger evident in his tone. With those hostages, all to advance his career. Lana watched her father absorb this information. His face remained impassive, but she had learned over the years to read the subtle signs of his emotions. What she saw now was a cold, controlled fury unlike anything she'd witnessed before. The hostages, Thorne said, were finally the children. What happened to them? Safe, Archer assured him. Relocated to Canada. The father works as an engineering professor now. The oldest boy just started medical school. Something in Thorne's posture relaxed slightly at this news, a weight visibly lifting. He nodded once, acknowledging the information with evident relief. Will you come? Weston asked to attend the ceremony for Riley, for all of us. Thorne hesitated, looking at Lana. His life here in West Haven had been built around anonymity, around distance from his past. Acknowledging that past publicly, even in a classified setting, would change things irrevocably. Dad, Lana said softly, I think you should go. Thorne studied his daughter's face, seeing understanding there that surprised him. She had absorbed so much in the past few days, learned so much about the man who had raised her, yet instead of pulling away, she seemed to be seeing him more clearly than ever before. When? He asked Sable. Decision made. 3 days from now in Washington. Thorne nodded once, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. I'll be there. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and reflection. Thorne arranged for the boatyard to be covered in his absence. Adresha would keep an eye on things while he and Lana traveled to Washington. Principal Finch approved Lana's absence from school, especially after learning of the naval base's generous donation to the music program. The night before their departure, Thorne found Lana in her room carefully packing her cello. You don't need to bring that, he said from the doorway. She looked up, surprised. I thought I might play something at the ceremony, if that's allowed. Thorne was momentarily speechless. You'd want to do that? For the men who didn't come home, she said simply. And for you, Mom taught me that music says things words can't. Thorne nodded, emotion threatening to break through his careful composure. She was right about that. Were you afraid? Lana asked suddenly. In Damascus. Thorne considered the question carefully. Yes, he admitted finally, not of dying, of failing, of making the wrong call and having others pay the price. But you didn't fail, she said. You got the hostages out. At a cost, he reminded her. A cost that wasn't your fault, Lana countered. That's what this ceremony is about, isn't it? Setting the record straight. Thorne smiled slightly. When did you get so wise? Must have inherited it from Mom, she replied with a small grin. The ceremony was held in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, the space transformed by flags and formal military displays. Despite the classified nature of the event, the room was full. Military personnel in dress uniforms, intelligence officials, and most importantly, the families of those lost in Damascus. Thorne sat stiffly in his assigned seat, wearing a suit that felt foreign after years in work clothes. Lana sat beside him, her cello case at her feet. She had been surprised when Commander Sable approved her request to play, but grateful for the opportunity to contribute something meaningful to the occasion. The Secretary of the Navy spoke first, his words carefully chosen to acknowledge the classified nature of the event while emphasizing its importance. Today we correct the record, he stated firmly. Today we honor courage and sacrifice that, for reasons of national security, have gone unrecognized for too long. Thorne listened with measured detachment as the Secretary outlined the basics of the Damascus operation, the new evidence that had emerged, and the findings of the investigation. He described how intelligence had been manipulated, extraction plans compromised, and the truth buried to protect careers rather than honor sacrifice. 3 men gave their lives that night, the Secretary continued, not through insubordination or poor judgment, but through extraordinary valor in the face of impossible circumstances. Staff Sergeant Seth Riley, Chief Petty Officer James Donovan, and Specialist Michael Kramer demonstrated the highest traditions of service. Today, their records are formally corrected, and Navy crosses will be presented to their families. The ceremony proceeded with somber dignity. The families of the fallen men accepted the medals with tears and pride. Thorne watched, his expression carefully controlled as widows and parents received the recognition their loved ones had deserved years ago. Then Commander Sable stepped forward. We also recognize the survivors of Damascus, men who completed the mission against overwhelming odds, who refused to abandon innocent civilians despite direct orders, and who carried their wounded brothers through 20 dalmand of hostile territory. One by one, Weston and Archer were called forward to receive their own commendations. Finally, Sable turned to where Thorne sat. And we recognize Master Sergeant Thomas Everett, known to his team as Iron Ghost, is a man who made the hardest choice a commander can face. To continue a mission when ordered to abort, knowing the cost of either decision would be measured in lives. Thorne rose slowly, the name he had abandoned a decade ago, settling around him like an old familiar coat. He walked to the front of the room with the measured stride of a man accustomed to precise movement. The Secretary handed him a case containing the Navy Cross. Your country thanks you for your service and your sacrifice, he said formally. The record has been corrected. Thorne accepted the medal with a crisp nod. Thank you, sir. But the real recognition belongs to those who didn't come home. As he returned to his seat, he noticed Lana watching him with pride evident in her eyes. She had heard his birth name for the first time, seen him acknowledged for who he had once been. Yet her expression held no confusion or distance, only understanding and a deep, unwavering support. After the formal presentations, Sable approached the podium again. Before we conclude, Lana Merrick, daughter of Master Sergeant Everett, has asked to offer a musical tribute to honor those we lost and those who survived Damascus. Lana moved forward with her cello, setting up quickly at the front of the room. She adjusted her posture, positioned her bow, and began to play Samuel Barber's Adagio for strings, the same piece she had performed at the naval base, but now infused with a deeper understanding of its significance. The mournful, haunting melody filled the room. Thorn watched his daughter play, her expression serene yet powerful as her bow moved across the strings. The music spoke of loss and remembrance, of sacrifice and honor in ways words never could. When she finished, silence held for several heartbeats before applause began. Thorn noticed tears on the faces of the families of the fallen men. Even the hardened military personnel and intelligence officials seemed moved by the performance. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Thorn found himself approached by a woman he recognized as Seth Riley's widow, Jennifer. "Thomas," she said, using his original name. "I've waited 10 years to thank you." Thorn shook his head slightly. "I couldn't bring him home to you." "But you tried," she replied. "And now we know the truth that matters." She embraced him briefly before moving away, leaving Thorn momentarily at a loss. One by one, family members of the fallen man approached, offering similar sentiments. They had lived for a decade believing their loved ones had died because of a subordinate's poor judgment. Now they knew the truth, that their husbands and sons had died as heroes, betrayed not by their team leader, but by their command. Weston joined Thorn as the crowd thinned. "What now, Ghost? Going back to fixing boats?" "That's the plan," Thorn confirmed. "You could come back, you know," Weston suggested. "Your records are clean now. The skills you have are still needed." Thorn glanced at Lana, who was carefully packing away her cello. "I have other priorities now." Weston followed his gaze and nodded in understanding. "She's a credit to you and to Sarah." The mention of his late wife's name brought a flicker of emotion to Thorn's face. "Sarah would have been proud of her." "Of both of you," Weston corrected. "You did what she would have wanted. Protect your daughter. Gave her a good life." Sable approached before Thorn could respond. "The secretary would like a word before you leave." The brief meeting with the secretary was formal but respectful. Official acknowledgement of the corrected record, assurances that Thorn's civilian identity would remain protected, and a personal thank you for his service. "Will you be returning to active duty, Sergeant?" the secretary asked. "No, sir," Thorn replied without hesitation. "My service is complete." The secretary nodded, accepting the decision without argument. "Then I wish you well in your civilian life, Mr. Merrick. Your country thanks you." The drive back to West Haven was quieter than the journey to Washington. Both Thorn and Lana were processing the events of the past few days, finding a new equilibrium in their relationship. "Thomas Everett," Lana said finally, testing the name. "It sounds strange." "That man doesn't exist anymore," Thorn replied. "Legally or otherwise, but he's part of you." She pointed out. "Always has been." Thorn nodded, acknowledging the truth of her observation. "A part I needed to leave behind to be the father you needed." "I'm not sure that's true," Lana said thoughtfully. "Maybe I needed to know all of you." They fell silent again, comfortable in the shared understanding that had grown between them. The landscape passed by. Familiar territory was coming into view as they approached West Haven. Days later, at school, Principal Finch gathered the orchestra students to announce the naval base's special funding for the arts program. Commander Sable presented the check personally, his formal words careful to avoid any classified information, but clear in their intent. "In honor of unrecognized sacrifice," he said, handing over the generous donation. Students and parents applauded enthusiastically, unaware of the deeper significance behind the words. Lana sat quietly, watching her father stand at the back of the room, as he always had. But something had changed, not in how he positioned himself, but in how he carried himself. A weight had lifted, making his customary reserve seem less like hiding and more like a choice. After the presentation, Principal Finch approached Thorn. "You never mentioned your service." Thorn shrugged slightly. "Some things speak for themselves." "Well, the base commander was quite insistent about this donation after the ceremony." Finch continued. "Said it was the least they could do. Whatever impression you and Lana made, it was clearly significant." Thorn nodded noncommittally, his eyes finding his daughter across the room. She stood with her orchestra friends, laughing at something Adresia had said. The sound of her laughter carried to him, a reminder of everything he had gained by leaving his old life behind. That evening, Thorn worked in his boatyard on the same Callahan boat he'd been repairing before their world had shifted. The familiar work centered him, bringing him fully back to the present after days of confronting the past. Lana arrived with her cello, setting up in the corner of the workshop as she sometimes did. Without preamble, she began to play not the formal classical piece from the ceremony, but a simpler melody, lilting and bittersweet. Thorne stopped his work, listening. "Your mother loved that one," he said quietly. "I know," Lana replied, continuing to play. "I found her old sheet music in the attic years ago. Been practicing it when you weren't around." The music filled the workshop, weaving between tools and half-repaired boats, transforming the utilitarian space into something more profound. "She would be proud of you," Thorne said. Lana paused her playing. "She would be proud of both of us." As the melody resumed, Thorne returned to his work, his movement synchronized unconsciously with the rhythm of the music. After a while, he opened a drawer in his workbench, extracting a formal letter that had arrived that morning. The Naval Command letterhead was crisp and official, requesting his presence at a ceremony to formally recognize the surviving members of his team. Additional honors were to be bestowed, the letter explained. Now that the full scope of the Damascus operation had been evaluated, he studied it briefly before tucking it away again. Lana noticed. "You're not going." "Some ghosts are better left at rest," Thorne replied, turning back to the boat. But as he worked, something had changed in his bearing. A subtle shift that Lana noticed immediately. The weight that had burdened him for years had lifted. The secrets he had carried alone were now shared, acknowledged, and honored. He moved more freely, his actions less guarded. For the first time in her memory, she saw her father smile. Small, but genuine. It transformed his face, erasing years of careful vigilance and showing the man who existed beneath the protective layers. Lana continued playing as sunlight streamed through the workshop windows, casting long shadows across the floor. The music wrapped around them, bridging past and present, connecting the man who had been Iron Ghost with the father who had chosen a quieter path. Outside, dust rose from approaching vehicles. 3 cars pulled up to the boatyard. Commander Sable's government vehicle was followed by 2 civilian trucks. Weston emerged from one, his prosthetic leg catching the light. From the other came Archer, carrying something carefully wrapped in cloth. Behind them, a woman and 3 children exited the last vehicle, a family with Middle Eastern features, well-dressed and moving with the cautious awareness of people who had known danger. They paused outside, listening to the cello music drifting from the workshop. The oldest of the children, now a young man in his 20s, said something quiet to Sable. "He deserves this," Weston responded, nodding toward the workshop. "They all do." As they approached the door, Thorne looked up, somehow sensing their presence before they knocked. His expression changed to one of recognition and something more complex. The look of a man who had been carrying ghosts for too long, finally ready to let them rest. The first knock sounded as Lana's music reached its final resolving note. Father and daughter exchanged a glance of perfect understanding before Thorne moved to answer the door, stepping forward to meet his past and his future simultaneously.